Well, the pro-democracy protests in Bahrain and the government's deadly crackdown are having a big impact on the cost of insuring debt throughout that region. Specifically, though, next door in Saudi Arabia, we are seeing spreads widen out. Now, default swaps are surging. As I just mentioned, you can see a graph right here. Well, joining us from our London bureau is Raffaele Semonella. He is an emerging markets credit analyst at BNP Paribas in London. Raffaele, thanks so much for joining us. You spent 4 years in Dubai covering the Middle Eastern markets for Moody's. You're very familiar with what's happening in that region. Well, let's talk about, swaps spreads pretty much across the region, or the cost to insure debt, are widening out dramatically. What is your analysis telling you? Is this unusual given what we're seeing on the ground there?
Well, essentially what you're seeing is obviously Bahraini CDS are widening. They widen around 15 basis points today, but the thing that you're seeing is that CDS of all the peripheral countries around Bahrain are also widening over the last couple of days. You have seen Saudi, and what's driving CDS and the widening of CDS in Saudi is mainly the fact that investors are concerned that the Shia protests in Bahrain might lead to further uprisings in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, which is the region where obviously the oil resources are. We haven't seen that so far.
Raffaele, let me ask you a question. It seems as if, Saudi Arabia was not as big of a concern as it related to what was happening in Egypt or Tunisia, but Bahrain seems to be striking much closer to what's happening in Saudi Arabia and sort of concerns there, or investors' hearts in that region. Did you see Saudi spreads widen out when we were really talking or focused on Egypt?
Absolutely, but I think that the widening has been far more pronounced in this case. I think you have to differentiate between Egypt and Bahrain. Definitely Egypt is important from a political standpoint, but the fact that in Bahrain the protests are mainly led by the majority Shia is definitely a concern for investors, because that might lead, and this is what investors are concerned about, that might lead over time to uprisings in Saudi Arabia. I don't think that's our base case so far, because from what we have seen so far, we really didn't have any major protests in Saudi Arabia, and the two protests really that we had so far in Saudi Arabia were really not related to the concerns to the situation both in Egypt and Bahrain.
Raffaele, is there any way to tell whether or not these are investors or sort of speculators or people that are hedging risk that they have to the region?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think there is a bit of panic and there is a bit of reasonable concerns. I think when you look at Saudi Arabia, there is indeed the risk of contagion. It's very marginal at this point, but in the end, obviously, that is mainly a reflection of something that we could see, obviously, in the market.
Let me ask you very quickly, because we only have about 30 more seconds, but what do you expect spreads to do going forward at this point? Do you think the market's overreacted?
I don't think the market overreacted. I think all the concerns of the market are justified, but at the same time, I think we have to look mainly at two events. The first event, as you said, how the situation in Bahrain evolves over the coming days. I think the difference between the protest in Bahrain and the protest in Egypt is that the army in Bahrain is fully supporting the ruling family. And the second event is obviously that investors are very concerned about the reaction that Israel might have over the next week or so regarding the obviously two Navy ships that are going through the Suez Canal. We have seen that Egypt has obviously approved the passage of these two ships. The key driver of credit, of the credit environment over the last couple of next weeks, obviously, will be the reaction, how Israel will, and if will respond, obviously, to these two Navy ships.
All right. Raffaele, thank you so much for joining us. That was Raffaele Semonella, emerging markets credit researcher for BNP Paribas, joining us from London.